Welcome to Business Beyond the Mic, where we join Carly Van Heerden, CEO and founder of We Edit Podcasts. Together, let's uncover the art of podcasting.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Business Beyond the Mic. I'm your host, Carly Van Heerden. Today on the show, we welcome Jonathan Warncke. Jonathan is a creative director, brand strategist, copywriter, and podcast producer. He has over 15 years of experience as a copywriter and creative director, working in top agencies in South Africa and Spain. He has also served as an in-house creative director at Virgin Active South Africa, and in 2019 he founded Ping, a podcast production studio. John is also the managing director of the South African Podcasters Guild, and he has a whole range of podcasts, including Off the Grid, South African Expats, Visualize This, and his latest, How to Make a Podcast in South Africa. This was truly such an incredible and unique conversation because of the diverse amount of podcasts that John has in his repertoire. So listen in as he shares in our chat all the lessons that he's learned over the years, including why he thinks and believes that the best place to grow your show is through other podcasts. You know, John puts a high value on community, especially in a time where loneliness and disconnect is at an all-time high. So why don't we find out how he plans to change the landscape of podcasting through stronger connections with each other? Join us in the conversation. Jonathan, welcome to Business Beyond the Mic. It's so great to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be such an interesting conversation. We've already spent how many minutes just chatting beforehand and just getting to know all the different aspects of you. But why don't you start us off? Tell us a bit more about yourself, your business, your brand, and your many podcasts.
Right. Well, to sum it up briefly, I suppose, I'm a copywriter. I came up in the advertising industry as a copywriter and then a creative director. And then I went freelance. And then right before the pandemic hit, I decided to turn into podcasting because I have done a lot of radio work in my lifetime. And I really love working in sound. So I thought that'd be a nice pivot, just another kind of thing to explore, thing to learn. So I started doing that, and then the pandemic hit, and then obviously podcasting saw quite a bump at that point. So I was kind of went the route of making branded podcasts, landed a few clients there, but I also have a number of my own podcasts, as you've said. So, I mean, these are kind of in the back there, next to the Doom can, very South African. There's a few kind of pieces of artwork on from my show. So that's Off the Grid in SA. I'm going to try and point to them with a reverse camera. Off the Grid in South Africa, a guide to shedding load shedding. That's a branded podcast called Abaqoqli, the Storytellers. That's Visualize This, which is visualizations and meditations. Supposed to kind of mind yoga is the way I describe it. There's South African Expats, which is interviews with people who have left South Africa and why did they leave? How did they leave? What's their experience upon arriving in the new place? And then The Hard Way was a branded podcast I did for a survival store. It's basically stories about the owner telling tales of how he almost died. And then the Resource Cast, which was a show for a online freelancer community in South Africa called The Resource. And beyond that, I've got one kind of secret show, which is just for my son. So I make a podcast where I basically make kind of voice notes, or I make recordings about what's happening in our lives right now. And it's a public show, but obviously I don't advertise it in any way. But yeah, kind of like notes to him about what's happening. And at some point, whether when he turns 18 or gets married or I die horribly, then he'll get the link to that, and then he can have a listen. And I'm still working on getting interviews with his grandparents and all that as well, so he can have that kind of resource. So yeah, that's
amazing.
Yeah, so in the last kind of 4 years, there's been a lot of shows, and now my focus is on the South African Podcasters Guild, which is a non-profit organization for uplifting podcasting in South Africa. And I'm working on, there's a news show, but I kind of turn newsletters, emailers into podcasts as well. So there's a recorded version of every newsletter, so you can listen to it instead of read it. And then the main show is How to Make a Podcast in South Africa. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Well, that repertoire is incredible and so creative. And I mean, what a great way to leave your son notes. I mean, we spend so much time with my son listening to, his little podcast that he loves, where a mom is reading books with her son, and he loves doing that. So, and listening to those. So it's a great idea to be the creator of that if that's something that you're interested in. And it's, just to see what you've done is amazing. But in all those instances, like what was the spark that said, I should turn this idea into a podcast? And how did you come up with all of those different ones?
My background in advertising is quite is quite focused on where's the gap, where's the market, what's working, what could be a success, I suppose. And then also finding out what aligns with what I'm actually interested in. So the visualization and meditation thing, that's a huge genre in podcasting, but it's also something that I'm into. South African expats, I was thinking about emigrating from South Africa, and I wanted to interview people for my own purposes because we were having a conversation about it, my wife and I. And by the end of season 2, we'd made our decision to stay up to such a point that, that changes, that won't change for another kind of 5 years or so for the foreseeable. So that's why that show is kind of dormant now. So essentially it's kind of scratching my own itch a little bit. Off the grid, that was kind of like an on-trend experiment, because load shedding, for those of you who are not from South Africa, we have intermittent electricity, and people are finding their own solutions to that through solar and various other means. And it's a show about essentially how to switch to solar and all that. So, and again, it was research for my own purposes. So that's a lot of the driver where it comes from. And also, I do like to think about, what is there an actual market for as well?
Yeah. Have you noticed something that you've changed, just like thinking back to the first podcast that you launched, and then now with your brand new one? What was been the biggest things that you've done differently, or, adapted as you've become a, seasoned podcaster over the years?
I used to overprocess everything terribly in terms of production, right? I would go for that boomy radio voice is kind of what I thought was what cool podcasting is. So I would always put this big filter on it to up the bass, and it sounds like you're underwater. And now I like a much more clean and clear sound. So definitely overdoing it there. And then over time, of course, your production process kind of becomes more efficient, and you start using more complex tools. So I started out using Audacity because it was free, and then Alitu because it was simple, and then Hindenburg because it was also simple but slightly more powerful, and now I use Reaper. So mostly the production stuff has changed. And I think over time, when you do interviews, you get better at doing interviews. That's just a natural thing. I'm still trying to kill the ums and ahs, but that's kind of the next frontier for me. And now I've become horribly aware of all the ums and ahs I'm about to say.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always like saying, that's amazing, because in my mind, what other word can I use?
Yeah,
incredible.
I say awesome at the end of everyone's answer.
Yeah. And you run out of ideas by the end, and then you keep going back to your favorite. That's amazing.
One thing that I've definitely learned is to try and be as quiet as you can when someone's answering, because I tend to go, all the time. And it's a very human thing to do, because that's how we talk, but it doesn't work so well in the recording.
Yeah, especially because then they have to go out and delete that. So, I'm going to say, now you can hear the real life podcasting when you're in the studio that's got a lot of people around. And that's the thing. You don't know what's going to happen when you're recording. So somebody could be drilling somewhere, chopping down a tree. That's happened to me with a guest. There's always kids is the other thing.
Oh, spoiler, there'll be dogs, probably a drill. When you've got a home studio, I'd love to have a dedicated, properly soundproof studio. But we do have to work around things like life.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that overproduction is something that we do on the technical side of things, like take out all the ums, take out all the pauses, make it as clean as possible. But sometimes we forget that it loses that natural conversation that we have with people. But It makes sense. I mean, I say it's a little bit of a dilemma of that, not perfectionist, but you have this dilemma of you want great quality content. I mean, I'm in the audio business. We make great quality audio for people. And if you don't have that to work with, it's tough to get there. But where's the line between natural conversation and overproduction? And I think you just learn that over time. Like you said, it's something that you learn from one step to the next.
Yeah. I have a history of overdoing it in certain elements of production and then having to find my way back to normal. I became a tech Nazi when I started about, the equipment that I have is important. And then the post-production became important. And then it became an Nazi, as it were, like killing everything. And then it sounded unnatural. I took out breaths, and then I've had to find my way back to just trying to sound natural and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you see like the different content that you wanted for each of these things? How did you structure like the format of the podcast? How did you know that an interview would be perfect for, well, obviously for the expat things, that made sense because you're interviewing people about their experience. But then for the other ones, how were you able to structure them, and what was like the decision-making process when it went into the format of each podcast?
So there are two elements to that. The first one being that most genres will have a predilection for a certain kind of format, right? So as you say, the expats make sense. The resource cast interviews with freelancers about being professionals, creatives, makes sense. The meditation show, that is a genre that leads itself to monologues, because it is strange to have a dialogue meditation, which, although an interesting idea, don't you think?
Yeah.
And then on another level, I'm trying to test every format there is. So I've done monologue, I've done dialogue, I've done panel, I've done narrative style with Off the Grid, where I interview people, but then I often kind of overlay my narration a little bit, kind of like Freakonomics, 99% invisible, that kind of thing. So I'm testing all the different things so that when I, for example, go to a brand, I can say, oh, I've made this kind of show, so I can use it as a reference.
And personally, what's your favorite style?
I really enjoy conversations in person. This is fine too, but I find so much more energy in being in the room with the person, and I find that my energy level changes completely when I'm in the room. And I also do a fair amount of kind of radio play, audio drama experiments on the side. I really like that because that's something you can do almost exclusively by yourself until you need voice actors. But because perhaps it's an antidote to the isolation of being a podcaster sometimes, interviews with other humans in a real space is energizing.
Yeah, I had someone on the show, Nate, and he has only done in-person interviews. He's never, I was his first like over the internet interview. And he said he could immediately feel even himself as being on the other side of the mic, not as relaxed, you're just not feeding off the other person as you would when you're sitting in a room with them, actually getting to know them. And I think also like the lasting conversations and relationship afterwards is different with that person. Like you're making this amazing connection, and I'm grateful for obviously to be able to do it over, a recording platform. But I think, if you meet someone in person, there's so much like a spin-off that can happen after that when you are in the same room, and you can go for coffee or have lunch or do something, and ideas come up and bubble up. That's something that you miss out on this part.
Yeah. And also on a technical level, lag. Just you can end up kind of talking over each other and all that because of lag.
I do that all the time. Or you have the long silences where you just want to make sure you're waiting for someone to be done talking. Yeah, absolutely. Now, when we're talking about these different podcasts, it's so fascinating to me to think about having multiple podcasts, going on. Actually, first question is, do you still run all of them right now, or are they kind of finished, or how did you do it?
Well, no, I could never run them all in parallel. So there are occasional updates to some of them when I find a great interview or a specific idea that I want to cover. But right now, the only active ones I have are Powder Maker podcast in South Africa and the one for my son. And that's about it. Yeah. Because especially because I'm editing about 3 to 4 branded podcasts right now. Yeah. So it's really just the time investment in editing that I can't spread myself further,
And that's the thing, because I was thinking about it. If you are doing all of these, how do you make sure, when you're thinking in terms of like a branded podcast, and what comes with that is community, and listenership. So how do you know what you're doing is serving your audience, or how are you growing that around your podcast? Or is that an important metric for you?
Well, in branded podcasts, you're either kind of directly interfacing with the client quite closely, so that when you post, when they post the social media clips you give them or that they make, you can check the engagement and you get some stats, which is great.
Yeah.
For a couple of bigger clients, they have a marketing team with a paid media plan. They have a whole thing going on. So once you've done production and recording and editing, they kind of take it out of your hands, which is also not a bad way to work, because none of that stuff is super fun for me. Despite being in advertising, I don't enjoy advertising, especially on multiple social media platforms, too much.
Yeah. It's tricky. Marketing your podcast is a whole nother job, right? It's if you're not already talking directly to the client, or as you say, it's, who's going to know about your show if you're not going to tell them about it, which is something that it keeps coming up on this podcast for understanding how to do that, or how to get your podcast out in a sea of podcasts. So it's interesting to hear that perspective.
I mean, if I do have an opinion about that, if you would like to hear it.
I would love to hear it.
Look, I mean, in South Africa, very few of the podcasters here have a budget. They're doing it by themselves. It's their own thing. That's fine. But if you are aiming to monetize in some way, then you should have a paid media budget, because organic media sucks. Like Facebook doesn't want to show anything you give it unless you're paying them money, right? And I think there's something like a 6 or 7% discovery rate for stuff that you post in a group that you're a member of and other people are a member of. It's terrible. So there are, with just a little bit of boosting media on Meta, Google less so. I find like Meta is quite good, but mostly I think it seems that the most effective way is advertising in other podcasts is the best way to go. And if you can do promo swaps, guest swaps, host swaps, all that kind of stuff, then that's the best way to go. But, posting on TikTok, X, IG, Reels, YouTube Shorts, a newsletter, it's it's never ending. And as you say, it's a whole other job.
Yeah, it is. That's what I say. And it was interesting. I was on someone's podcast, a marketing podcast. And then one of the fun questions he had in there is, how much time do you spend on social media for your job? And I was like, gosh, that's the thing. What are we doing there? Are we just like sitting there trying to post stuff because you're expected to be posting things?
Yeah.
It really sometimes makes me think about it, because what the point of marketing or, doing something is to help other people. So it's a very interesting dilemma that I've been sitting with lately, is that time spent on social media for work.
And how much better could it be if you weren't doing all that social media stuff? If you had 3 hours every day to work on the show instead, how would that go?
Yeah. So anyways, all the things that we do for the podcast and growing, but speaking of monetization, what other ideas? And I know we chatted earlier about how that's one of the top things that people search for, is how to monetize your podcast, especially if you don't have a budget and you're trying to make your podcast work for you. So what other tips do you have for people going down that path?
Well, we haven't fully explored that in How to Make a Podcast in South Africa. We are doing kind of a series on monetization, because it's the number one thing that people are interested in. I'd say we have a sign-up form for the guild, and I think almost everyone clicks "I'd like to monetize," So that we've covered in an upcoming episode with the chief operating officer of a fairly large hosting platform called Iono.fm in South Africa. They've got about 2,500 podcasts and online radio streams. So he's got access to a huge amount of data. And there's obviously monetizing through ads, and that's what that conversation is about, programmatic advertising or baked in or whatever it might be. But we hope to have conversations in the future about Patreon. There's a great South African podcaster named Dan Dews who lives in the UK now. He's got a show called By Kids for Kids. I want to chat to him. Obviously, subscriptions, enhanced content, merchandising, and all those kind of things. When it comes to my show, How to Make a Podcast in South Africa, it's not it's a value add for members. So we're member funded. We've got a little bit of seed money from one of the directors. There's 3 directors, and one of the directors, his company, very kindly gave us some money to kind of get started with Squarespace and all the other tech stack things that you have to pay for. But going forward, it's going to be membership fee. So our only job is to add value for the members, which is nice because it's a little bit, I guess, like Patreon, for example, where as long as you're creating value, you get more income. And you don't have to deal necessarily with advertising too much, which is also its own complex thing.
Yeah. And it can be kind of like a direction or a booster in a certain way. If you're doing the right things and your members are happy and they're supporting you, then you're like, yes, I'm giving them the value that they want. I'm setting my goals that I've set, I'm reaching. So yeah, it's a nice little direction compass, I guess I would say.
We're very young still. I mean, it's been since November the 4th. So we're only a few months into it. We've got 132 members. And really, funnily enough, you talked about community. The real value I find in the community is in the WhatsApp community that we created. And we went with WhatsApp because it's free, number one. And number two, because everyone has WhatsApp. There's other platforms like Mighty Networks and Circle and all that kind of thing. But the ability to interact with Nicole, who's got the number 4 podcast in South Africa, or Gavin, who has produced over 350 podcasts. Like, there's an incredible amount of value to be found in just being able to chat, and also socially, to not feel like it's just you.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I've from the perspective of living in Canada for many years and now being back in South Africa, WhatsApp is a lot bigger here than it is in North America. So you guys definitely use it as a platform a lot more. And I agree 100%. Like, I'm already joined in all the the WhatsApp groups in my community and everything too, because that's where I'm going to find my information the fastest. But it's just interesting to see the difference in countries, how WhatsApp is so much bigger in South Africa and been used to its potential, I would say.
Sure.
But yeah.
I mean, that kind of leads into a degree why we have a South African how to make a show in South Africa show, because there is so much content about how to make a podcast, from the recording to the technical stuff to the marketing to everything. But there are local issues in terms of data availability, and what equipment is available and how to find a studio to record in if you don't have one at home, and also dealing with the cultural aspects of South Africa in so many languages, and trying to grow the industry into more than just English and Afrikaans and all that. So there's so it's worth being hyper local.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that definitely, if someone's going to type that into Google, they're going to type exactly what your podcast is called, how to start a podcast in South Africa.
It does what it says in the box. I'm a creative, but I'm not that big on creative names, apparently. Like South African expats, it's not it's not clever.
I can totally relate. My company is called We Edit Podcasts.
We Edit Podcasts,
so it's pretty much what we do. No,
can I be the 800th person to say Weed It Podcasts?
It's been the thing. Sometimes we get
t-shirts.
we get dinged about that sometimes in campaigns and stuff on social too, because they're like, you cannot be promoting.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've had some interesting times, but yeah, it does what it has to do. But yeah, Jonathan, it's been such an interesting conversation with you. And I think just to get to have like this raw conversation about all things that go into having multiple podcasts, having gone from first one to this one recently. Is there something else that you're working on right now, a project or anything that you want to share with our audience today?
Well, I think the little things that we're beavering away at the South African Podcasters Guild might not be too relevant to most of your listeners because it is so local. But I will say that for anyone, out there who's making podcasts or is building something, I think bringing community into it is a really powerful tool. I found that people are so enthused. It's the right time for what we're doing, and people are behind it. And opening up, I think what we often miss in podcasts is the ability to talk back and forth with our audience. And they're building that in. There's Q&As, and Seth Godin does, he's got his Akimbo, go to akimbo.link and press the appropriate button and all that kind of thing. But I think that there's a real future in finding communities and serving them and being a part of them instead of kind of just announcing content out and seeing what happens to your stats, But and I say that as someone who is very bad at I don't, besides the Podcasters Guild, I haven't traditionally done a lot of research into how is it landing, asking people questions, what did you like, what don't you like, and all that. But that's a weakness I have to work on still as well.
Well, it's interesting because I think you have based your podcast about that initial, almost a need for yourself too. So it's not necessarily that you went out to serve a specific audience, but then found community in what you've done. So
I'm selfish and lazy.
You're solving a problem for yourself.
Exactly. I'm solving a problem for myself. Let's put it like that.
Oh, well, I feel like we should dig into some of the ways that podcasting has shaped your life. So I want to hop into the quick fire questions here at the end, just for a little bit of fun. So the first one is, how has podcasting changed the way you do business or life?
50% or so of my income is still from copywriting and advertising work. And now that is slowly, swinging the other way, which was my intention. So now some of it is also podcasting. Definitely, it's a great industry to be in. So it's changed my life in terms of happiness because I enjoy the conversations. I enjoy being in the edits and making a thing or, by myself or with others, as opposed to, presenting work to a community, to a committee and being reviewed and having feedback and having multiple clients and multiple levels of clients. I cannot overstate the cynicism I have about marketing. So it's made me much happier in that way. I love working from home in my little studio. Yeah. And now recently, because of the guild, after the pandemic, after going freelance, I just feel connected to people again, which, I think is a huge societal problem that we have now, is a sense of disconnection and loneliness that I'm solving for myself.
Yeah, there you go. But it's very on brand for you. I feel like you're doing it again, and it's great. Now, what would you say is a non-negotiable or some of the top tools that you need for your podcasts?
Earlier I would have said various forms of equipment. I honestly think that it's all contextual, and you can record on your phone. It's the story or the content or the interview. That's what's important, not the production necessarily of it. I think my non-negotiable is time. It's just that I split my work up into half days and I work on multiple projects at the same time. I just need to sleep on stuff. I can't. The work always suffers when you're under a deadline and you have to work 8 hours for 3 days in a row. And then by the end of it, you haven't actually let your subconscious work through it. So that's what I try to build into my work.
Yeah. And on that note, what would you say is one of the biggest lessons that you've had on this podcasting journey?
Probably not to get too obsessed with any one element of the thing, not to get too obsessed with the production, the show notes, the marketing. Don't worry too much about AI. Use it if you will, but this is me talking about it, but not doing it. By the way, I advise other people to do this, but I'm going to keep
it's the intention.
Yeah. Do what I say, not what I do.
Now, if time or money were not an issue, what would be next for you in your podcasting career?
If time or money were not an issue, I would put all of my time into the Podcasters Guild. I would do nothing but that. It's the most fun that I'm having right now. It's all for free because it's a non-profit and the 3 directors are not getting paid for the foreseeable future. So I'm trying to kind of squirrel it in between my paid podcasting work and my copywriting work. And I would love for it to be more full-time. So yeah, that would... working on this is my new favorite thing.
No, and I can see it because it's got every element that I've heard you talk about over the last few minutes. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you guys do. And yeah, everybody definitely go and check it out, especially if you are from South Africa or in the community and you want some place to share with other podcasters. It'll be an amazing find for you. And yeah, Jonathan, it's been so great to hear more about what you're doing, what you've done in podcasting, and just the incredible ideas you've had and what you've accomplished. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing with everybody all that you've learned.
Thank you so much, Carly. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.